The wave of gibberish hit me as I walked towards him, and I thought it was some kind of invitation to talk. But he broke off again and went back to his trance-like singing. There were other Tunisians around, all grinning madly, and I felt embarrassed and annoyed. For me, this ferry crossing to Africa represented a decisive leap into the unknown, a voyage of no return. Although the fighting between Egypt and Israel had stopped, I thought it might break out again at any moment. I was full of stern forebodings and in no mood for mockery, and I shied off to the far rail to talk to two effete Englishmen from Tangier who offered me the proper degree of respect. As far as I could see, we were the only European passengers. The crew members were Italian and wore fancy blue sashes around their middles, which I thought less than manly. The other travellers were evidently Tunisians going home from the great casual labour exchanges of the north, dressed by the flea markets of Europe, and carrying their belongings in big cardboard boxes or papier-mâché suitcases tied with string. As my friends gossiped about the goings-on at the court of the King of Morocco, I watched the thin, hardy men with their enormous bundles of stuff fighting their way along the gangways and through the hatches. The scapegoats of Europe, wearing our cast-off clothing, hustled and slandered from border to border, available to do any job too dirty for a white man. No wonder they looked ugly and morose, except when grinning. No wonder I thought they had been mocking me. After a while, my smart friends decided to take to their cabin for a snooze, since they were travelling first class, and I went into the main saloon to see how I would pass the rest of the 10-hour crossing. The saloon was nearly full of Arabs, stretched out in the upholstered chairs and sofas trying to sleep. I started talking in French to my neighbour, a gentle Tunisian engine driver called Hassan. But it was only a few moments before I began to be aware of the barman. He was twiddling the knobs of the television set. He was angry. The thick white flesh of his face was set in an expression of stubborn conceit. He was literally pig-headed. The set had been tuned to a program of Arab music, but the channel he wanted was showing an Italian football match. The picture was indiscernible through the interference patterns, and the sound was merely a crashing roar of static, but it seemed to satisfy him. It was plain that he was not going to have any bloody wog music in his saloon. He was a fat, short man, and his pregnant belly slung over the silly blue sash made him look unbearably pompous. As he steered his bumptious body back to the bar, he kicked aside the outstretched feet of sleeping Tunisians rather than walk around them. On his way, he picked up empty soda bottles and flung them skillfully halfway across the lounge into a large cardboard box, where they fell with a regular shattering din. From then on, I was unable to take my eyes off him. It was truly breathtaking to see one man seize upon an environment which belonged theoretically to his 40 or so customers and use it for the complete expression of his own selfish and domineering nature. Behind the bar, his seat of power, he granted or withheld his favors as capriciously as any despot. Europeans he served with a ghastly conspiratorial grin. Others he refused altogether, loudly, rudely, with vulgar gestures. When some newcomer dared to tamper with the TV, he flew into terrible tantrums. His strutting and posturing were unforgettable. He treated the lounge and its occupants as his private colony, and with great energy found 1,000 ways of showing his contempt, mildly reflected in other members of the crew, while the rest of us submitted in our various ways, resigned, resentful, or merely numbed. He represented in my eyes all that is brutal, greedy, and corrupt in human behavior, and he was a powerful influence in stimulating my sympathy for the Arabs. Short of violence, it was obvious that the man could not be stopped. The singer came in a little later, when it started to rain outside. He sat at the far end of the lounge, still chanting and smiling as though at some Sufi vision. In the confined space, the songs were much clearer. Hassan said they were nonsense about girls and love, and he was apparently making them up as he went, but at least he offered an alternative kind of vitality to the terrible, malignant power of the barman. The Arabs nearest him began tapping and clapping along, and others drifted closer, but he continued for a while as though we were unaware of any of us, playing the fool for another audience that only he could see. The barman was noticeably annoyed, and the tempo of his outrages increased. But although he still commanded 2/3 of the saloon, he did not meddle with the singer, whose territory was growing. I sat for a while on the border line of their two spheres of influence, and it was like looking out on two different worlds. To my left, shouting, hostility, the smashing of bottles, and from the TV, the gibbering howl of the ether. To my right, singing, laughter, and a beat that was beginning to reach into me. Hassan and I moved across to the right. The singer judged this the moment to come out of his private retreat, and began to respond to his followers. I could not imagine how I would ever thought him distasteful. At worst he was a simple clown, but his power now seemed to grow as the barmans dwindled. He interrupted his buffoonery with poetry, and Hassan told me it was original and good. The same thumb and forefinger placed the words in the air with a precision and meaning that I felt I could understand, though I spoke no Arabic. The songs also became longer, more lyrical. Slowly, over a period of several hours, the pitch of his performance built up. The barman by now was utterly effaced. The TV could no longer be heard. Everyone in the saloon was with the singer, his to a man, and yet he still seemed strangely detached from us, not feeding at all on our adulation in the manner of a Western star. Nor was there ever an attempt by anyone to compete with him. He remained the focus of energy for the rest of the crossing. Towards the end, he moved from songs and poetry to oratory. It was a long speech, and if the rhythms were anything to go by, it was in the Arab equivalent of blank verse. His voice now was very muscular and gritty. The harsh, hard-nosed syllables flew out in formation and beat on my ear. His audience replied with moans and cries of agreement. I imagined the voice amplified 1,000 times, 100,000 times, from loudspeakers on all the minarets of Islam. The sounds conjured up an atmosphere of great ferocity, yet the sense of the speech, it turned out, was moderate. It had to do with peace and war in the Middle East. It praised the moderate statesmanship of Bourguiba and poured scorn on the troublemakers who would fight like Gaddafi of Libya to the last Egyptian. Hassan said it was good sense, realistic and very poetic. I too thought at first he was just a fool, but now what he says is very impressive. It was well after dark when the ship arrived in Tunis. By then I had made another friend, Mohammed, a young Tunisian who was one of the singer's most enthusiastic accompanists. He was more stylishly dressed than most, with a jazzy peaked cap on which he never removed. His nickname, loosely translated from Arabic, meant the swell. He asked me where I was going to stay in Tunis, and I said I had no idea.
Then you will stay with me. My family will be very honored. You will have everything we can offer. We will be extremely proud to have such a famous man in our house, and our friendship will last forever. I have a dark skin, but my soul is white as a lily. You will be safe and well in my house. Before leaving the ship, I happened to notice the barman. He seemed a rather insignificant person cleaning up after us, hardly worth bothering with. Arriving in Africa was, after all, pretty much like arriving anywhere. You used your imagination to make it different. There was a harbour, a passenger terminal, offices and officials, the usual formalities and indignities. Everyone spoke heavily pointed French against a background of murmuring Arabic. The ferry was a drive-on, drive-off ship, and there was no delay in unloading. I took the bike outside the dock gates and waited for Mohammed. I had explained that there was no room for him on the bike, and he had swallowed his disappointment and said he